Well, today we're going to be talking about moral foundations theory. We're going to be discussing a rather different way of thinking about morality than the one that most philosophers take seriously, whereby you basically analyze what is good in terms of some criterion for, let's say, right action or obligation, or maybe the existence of a virtue, and so on. This theory instead says psychologically, if you look at how people actually think about morality, they do it in ways that can't be predicted by them. And in fact, as we saw last time, the idea is, look, only partly does this depend on things that are rational, on actual reasoning and reflection. A lot of it just stems from emotional reactions. And we do have strong moral reactions to things. So give me some examples of things where if you, let's start with the negative. It's always easier to start with the negative. Maybe it's just the way I am, I don't know. But it seems easier to think of such cases where you witness something and you immediately think, that's terrible, right? Before you think about it, before you reflect on why, it's like morally, it's not just like, yuck. It's a moral sense of, that's bad. Yeah.
People not washing their hands after going to the bathroom.
People not washing their hands after going to the bathroom. I am occasionally tempted to stop people and say, didn't your mother teach you? Okay. It's really disturbing. So I agree with you completely on that one. It feels like it's not just, well, one of the things we're going to be talking about today is this sense of things being unclean. Okay, is that a moral thing? Most cultures do treat it as a moral thing, even though a lot of people who think of ethics in purely secular terms can't have a category for that. In fact, one time I heard a sermon about all of these texts in the Old Testament that are talking about this or that being unclean. And people said, so what in our contemporary world do we consider unclean? And they were things like crime and harms and war and injustice. And it's like, no, that's not what any of that is about. And you'll see why I said that. But my reaction to the whole thing was, you need to study moral foundations theory. This is a different thing. But other examples like that, where you immediately say, oh, bad. Yeah.
Like if someone gets hit in front of you.
Okay, yeah, somebody gets hit. No. Yeah, if you see something like that, you immediately think, oh, that's terrible. I saw somebody get hit by a bus. I was like, wow. Though that person wasn't hurt. They seemed to be splash. Takes all kinds. Anyway, other examples. Yeah.
When someone walks on the left side of the sidewalk.
When somebody walks on the left side of the sidewalk.
That's awful.
Okay, well, all right, good. Yeah, remember when we were talking about Confucius, we said his concept of propriety is rather broader than what we often consider, strictly speaking, moral. But if you, I don't know if these even exist anymore, but there used to be a newspaper columnist called Miss Manners. And one of her main points was that etiquette is part of morality. So somebody who walks on the wrong side of the sidewalk and you constantly have to dodge is, yes, being rude, but rudeness is a kind of immorality, right? I mean, you're supposed to treat other people with a kind of respect, and doing that kind of thing is disrespectful. And so her point was there isn't a very sharp line, and in that way she was very Confucian. Etiquette and morality kind of blend into each other. Okay, well, think of some positive things. You see something and immediately you admire that from a moral point of view. See, it's harder to think of the positive. Yeah.
Someone help an old lady across the street.
Good, helping an old lady across the street, okay? You think, there's somebody who's in trouble who needs help, somebody helps. Excellent. So it's a feeling of moral approval that immediately strikes you. And that can strike you before you think about it. It's not like you say, yes, I can reason to the conclusion that that's good. You have this immediate response. Yeah.
Like firefighters running in to save somebody.
Good, somebody's in trouble in a burning building, firefighters rush in, you admire the courage, the fortitude, the devotion to duty, putting yourself in danger in that way. And so that's an immediate response before you think through, they're putting themselves in danger, and blah, 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 blah. It's just this immediate reaction. Okay, now that, as we've seen last time, suggests a certain model. And we didn't yet draw a picture of that social intuitionist model, but we can. Remember, the rationalist model said that we perceive a situation, and that situation leads us into maybe an emotional reaction, but that's kind of irrelevant. Basically, it leads us into a process of reasoning, which leads to a moral judgment, and then that judgment leads to action. Well, in the case of the social intuitionist model, it's different. We want to say, yes, here's the situation and our perception of it. But then that produces primarily an emotional response. Or maybe we could say an intuitive judgment. An intuitive reaction is maybe the better way to put it than judgment. Because the thought is whether you call this emotional, whether you call it cognitive, whatever you say about the nature of this, it is intuitive, it's immediate. It's that system one that we were talking about last time, right? It's fast, it doesn't involve any conscious reasoning. You're not really, in fact, aware of anything going on in your brain until you get to the conclusion, like good, bad, positive, negative feeling. And then out of that arises some kind of moral judgment. And then maybe out of that arises action. Now, suppose you're going to try to persuade someone else. So far, all of this is internal, right? Internal to your own mind. But of course, there's somebody else, let's say, that you want to persuade, or you want to criticize, or you want to justify yourself to. There are lots of reasons why we care about actually making, well, I should say this, engaging in reasoning, okay? The thought is, we make this judgment, and then we engage in reasoning. The reasoning is really ex post facto. It's after the fact. It's coming after we've already come to the judgment. So we have this emotional response, let's say, we say, aha, I judge that that's good. And then if somebody says, why do you think that's good? Then we come up with reasons, but only after the fact, to try to justify what we did and the judgment we made. Now sometimes, now notice all this is going on inside of us. This is all internal. This is a private thing basically going on inside you. It is possible for there to be a feedback mechanism. You might reason about it, then you might think, maybe my judgment's wrong. So it's possible that your reasoning will lead you to change your judgment. It's also possible that your reasoning will actually lead you into a different emotional reaction. Now, actually, Haidt thinks those are both relatively rare. At least, except for philosophers, he said, who are much better at reasoning than most people. What can I say? Yeah, I don't know if that's true or not. But anyway, the thought is this. We can sometimes actually have a different emotional reaction or a different judgment based on our reasoning. But he thinks it's unusual. What would that be like? When do we reach a judgment? We have one of these immediate responses. But then we engage in some reasoning and change our minds.
Flat Earth.
Oh, well, in science we do it all the time, right? We think, and it's not just in science, but in lots of practical affairs, you might think, I think you do it this way, and then you try to disattach the faucet that way, and you realize, that's not how it works. So sometimes there are things like that, but in moral judgments, how does that work? Yeah.
I was thinking if you falsely accuse somebody of a crime, I guess.
Ooh, okay, so a really important way in which it can happen is that you find out new facts. So for example, you engage in some reasoning and you say, well, wait a minute, I was assuming that blah, 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 but maybe that's not true, right? And you go back and you examine the situation again and gather new facts. And it's interesting, Haidt doesn't talk about that, but I think actually that is probably the most common way this goes, which is you engage in some reasoning and you realize, I need to investigate further, right? I have an immediate emotional reaction to this. Like I see that kid helping the old lady across the street, and I think, that's good. And then I see, let's say, over on the other end of the street are a bunch of his hoodlum friends who start beating around money. And I think, that's not good. Right? So it's sort of like, sometimes this leads me to investigate the situation further, and I realize the appearance is misleading. He doesn't talk about that link, but I think that's actually much more common than the other two, maybe, that he does talk about. The basic idea behind reasoning affecting our intuitive judgment, our emotional response, if you will, is we put ourselves under the person's shoes. You think, well, here's my reaction, but then what if I were in their position? How would I feel about this? And through that imaginative exercise, you suddenly realize, wait, actually, now I see why they reacted the way they did. It's kind of an upset. Okay? So often this sort of thing happens because you're able to put yourself in the position of someone else. You engage in a little bit of role playing mentally. You think, oh yeah, I see it from their point of view. Some people are good at that, by the way, and other people seem terrible at that. The other thing is you just go directly to the judgment. You say, I'm going to engage in reasoning. And philosophers do this kind of thing. They engage in moral reasoning and they think, well, doesn't this commit me to this in this situation? And they say, I don't know if I agree with that, and blah, blah, blah. And so sometimes we actually do reason ourselves to new conclusions and change our judgments for those reasons. But it's relatively uncommon. Now, all of this is in the private sphere, but we do have this important public function. Let's say I'm convinced this sort of thing is wrong, but I see it going on around me all the time. I need to persuade other people that it's wrong. So how do I do it? Well, I realize I can't just engage in this reasoning in my own head. Now I've got to actually engage in moral discourse. I have to say something to try to persuade people. So I can engage, once I've done this, in persuasion. What's the point of the reasoning at all if it so rarely affects this? Partly it's because in order to engage in something public, I have to give people reasons. If I just say, that, bad, you wore green, don't wear green on Fridays, bad. What are you going to say? Why? Right? What's wrong with it? And I better have an answer. If my answer is just, I don't like green on Fridays, you're going to think, well, that's stupid. And I don't care what you think. And so if you're going to be persuasive, you have to engage in some kind of reasoning. You have to give some reasons for your opinions, or at least it seems like the best way to do it. Now, it's not necessarily the only way. Because when you persuade, how do you do it? The other person here, and now I've got to sort of, imagine this is like a clock thing. It switches perspectives here a little bit. This person is going to have an intuitive reaction. So let's say this is all person A up here. We're describing person B's process down here. I want to affect their intuitive reaction. I have to persuade. But notice, they're going to, out of that, construct a judgment. And I can also appeal directly to them, trying to get them to come to a judgment. So you might say, this is the rational element of persuasion, but here I've got an emotive element of persuasion. And Haidt's point is, they're both really important. The purely rational argument, if it doesn't appeal to somebody's intuitive responses, if it doesn't do anything for system one, it's unlikely to be effective. It's going to be most effective if it appeals to system one as well as system two, and so appeals to intuitive reactions. I may have mentioned that a good friend of mine rose to be very, very high in the world of advertising. Head of global marketing for major companies, and at the top New York ad guy in some of the biggest agencies in the world. He started out in the Marine Corps and got out of the Marines, took a class at a community college in logic and covered the logical fallacies. Okay? And he thought, these aren't fallacies. This is how to convince people. These are tools of persuasion, right? And so he said, I built my career on what I learned in intro logic, in community college. Basically, it was all from that. And he has a point. A lot of philosophers would say, oh gosh, that's really appalling. I mean, he was learning how to persuade people irrationally. You're supposed to persuade people this way. But Haidt's point is, actually, it's a lot more effective to persuade people this way, to give them emotional reasons. And then it's great to give them rational reasons too. I don't mean to say that's unimportant. But without this, that's not going to work very much. So, typically, in moral things anyway, this emotive component is really important. Now, there's all sorts of psychological research that backs that up. That's why ads aren't just text, right? I mean, think about an ad for a product. Let's say a beer, okay? You want somebody to buy your beer. What kind of ad do you produce to persuade them to buy it?
A mix with the Game of Thrones
Ooh, you mix it with the Game of Thrones, right? Or you show this beautiful scene on the beach. Or you in short, put somebody in a situation they would like to be in, and there's the beer. Or you show people that person would like to be like, drinking that beer, right? You don't simply say, here's the name of our beer. Text line. Here's the percentage alcohol. Here's the IBV. Here's the... It's like, that doesn't persuade you to buy that beer. It's got to be something that is this. And moral persuasion is kind of simple. Okay, well the thought is that maybe that person then engages in reasoning, and maybe their reasoning and their judgment ends up affecting you. Now there's another point here, which is your own intuitive reaction and your judgment can have a direct impact on their judgment. This is the social aspect of persuasion, where it's not actually dependent on any emotional or fully rational appeal. It's just because you think so too. Okay? So, think about situations where you're affected by just the judgments and reactions of the other people around. They aren't giving reasons. You're not even talking about it. They just all have a certain response. So you have that response. Yeah?
Like, a lot of economists have done research on ordering at restaurants and like in groups and like how other people order and what they talk about, like actually like determines what you will order and how many calories they eat.
Ah, okay, so yes, somebody else says, I'll have a special. Oh, that sounds good, I'll have a special. It's you. Yeah, me too, right? They didn't give you a reason, it's just like, oh, people in the group are doing that. Or everybody else is ordering a drink, and so you think, well, I haven't planned on it, but sure, I'll have a drink too. Or they have a negative reaction to something, right? You're thinking of ordering the, I don't know what, you're thinking of ordering the crayfish. And somebody else says, oh, they see it on the menu, they say, crayfish, oh, that's so gross. Right? And you think, maybe I shouldn't order that. Think about politics, okay, where other people around you all have this immediate reaction like, oh, that person's great, that person's awful. They don't give you reasons, but nevertheless you come away thinking, oh yeah, that person's great, that person's awful. Or what are some other situations? You're just affected by the group. I mean, it's peer pressure in a sense, right? Except often there's no pressure involved. It's not that they're saying, hey, I think this is really bad, you think so too, right? I mean, it might take that form, but it's often just like, you sense that the group has this attitude, and you want to fit in with the group. Yeah?
I feel like a play or a movie, people, how they react. It's like funny and stuff.
Good, yeah, there's this play or this movie. Is everybody else laughing? You're going to be inclined to laugh too. If nobody else laughs, you're going to think,
It's like the example that we talked about on the first or second day of class with the 3 lines, and one was obviously the shortest, and everyone else is saying, no, this one is...
yes, exactly, like that experiment, the Ash experiments, where there's an obviously right answer. You think, hey, I see that. But everybody else around you says something else. And about 75% of the people, at least some of the time, will go with the group, despite the clear evidence of their own eyes. And it was interesting when Ash asked them, why did you do that? They gave very different responses. Some were, well, I thought they were all crazy, but I didn't want to cause trouble. Or, in some cases, they said, I thought there must be something wrong with my eyes. And I didn't, want to draw attention to that. Or I thought maybe they're looking at something else, or maybe I misunderstand the directions. There was a lot of self-doubt mixed in then with this, oh, I don't want to be a troublemaker. I want to just fit in. And between the two of those, that could mean sometimes just realizing in your social milieu, everybody thinks that P becomes itself a reason for you to assent to P. Okay, well anyway, that's the basic idea of the model. But what it suggests is that these intuitive responses are really crucial. They are the main drivers. Now, if they're absent, sometimes we do just engage in pure reasoning and reach judgments on the basis of that. Sometimes we make arguments that really just have a strictly rational appeal. On the other hand, most of the time it's something else. And so, what really clues Haidt into this are these cases where people cannot give reasons. And the best cases for that are taboo. Okay, so last time we talked about a couple of those right at the end, where actually we don't know how to engage in reasoning about it. just seems wrong. So he has this example about incest. And it's constructed to get rid of all the reasons you might object to incest. But in the end, people still say, it's still wrong, okay? So we were talking about other things like disrespecting a dead body. It seems wrong. And yet, why? Confucius at one point says, look, it's very important to bury your parents. You don't want to just leave them out for the animals and eat them apart when they die. Like, why is that important? They're not going to feel it. I mean, you could just say, hey, Mom, sorry, but you're coyote food. But in fact, that's horrible, right? Nobody does that. It seems very elemental, and yet hard to give reasons for it. So, there are taboos like that. So Haidt starts thinking, well, what's going on with those? It feels like a moral failing. In fact, there's a very nice essay on morality by Joan Didion. It starts out in the desert. Okay, she's been going through Death Valley by car, staying in a little hotel, and talks about a horrible accident that happened that night. And somebody volunteered to stay out there with the body of the person who died so that they wouldn't be coyote food, and so that they could be coyote food. And she said, look, this appeals to something very deep in us, very elemental, something we don't even give reasons for exactly. Why is it so important? Well, this is what Haidt starts reflecting. And he comes up with what he calls moral foundations theory. It isolates 5 or 6, and I'll come back to the or 6 later, 5 or 6 basic foundations of morality. And he says, these are built into us in a very basic level. Now, their actual cultural implementation can vary, but on the other hand, they're nearly universal, and they're the kinds of things that morality is built out. Now, people put very different emphases on different dimensions here, so it's not as if it's all the same thing for all of us, but still they're present in everyone. So what are these things? The first one is care and harm. You refer to somebody being hit, right? Somebody's harmed, that seems bad to us. Caring, like helping the old lady across the street, seems good. So that's pretty basic. We don't like it when people get hurt. We want people to help other people. That seems like a positive thing, morally speaking. And everybody agrees that's important. Or virtually everybody. Everybody who's psychologically normal. The second thing has to do with fairness. Okay? And again, everybody has this idea. Some things are fair, some are not. It's connected to the idea of reciprocity, taking turns. So I do this for you, you do that for me. And if I refuse to reciprocate, that feels like something's gone wrong. Right? There's some unfairness, some injustice. Now, I think the others all are operative for all of us. But he does, one of the projects that led to this theory was trying to study the differences between political opinions of various groups in the United States. And he ended up concluding that people have different emphases on these 5 foundations. In particular, people who identify themselves as liberals tend to base their political opinions on these 2 dimensions. But he started studying not only conservatives, but then people from other cultures, saying, wait a minute, there are often things that are part of their moral and political framework that don't fit into these. And so, what's going on with those things? So he identifies 3 or 4 other foundations. What are they? Well, what doesn't fit into this foundation? If you think about things like the incest taboo, or taboos involving dead bodies and so on, you can say, well, yeah, it's not so much about justice. It's not really so much about harm. The person's already dead, or we construct the incest case carefully so that it's a hypothetical thing where there is no harm, etc. What's going on in some of those cases? What value is at stake? Yeah.
Purity and sanctity.
Good. One of these dimensions is purity and sanctity. So for example, the washing your hands when you leave the bathroom thing. Okay, part of me that's connected to harm, and the fact that, look, you're risking the spread of disease. But part of it is, that seems unclean, right? And here, not just unclean in the literal sense that there may be bacteria in your hands, but somehow it's impure. It's kind of like, I don't know, have you seen some of these studies where people take ordinary kitchen surfaces or other household surfaces and examine what bacteria are on them? Really disturbing. In fact, several decades ago, there was a book about what happens in your house or apartment when you're not there, and all of the microbes that are doing their thing, like the little dust mites in your bed or eating your skin cells and so on. Horrifying book, actually. I mean, intriguing, but like, but it's connected to this sense of purity. It's like, I don't like thinking about myself as just covered in microbes, and every surface that I touch covered in microbes and stuff like that. And so there is a sense in which, well, yeah, it can be connected to risk of disease, etc. But actually, we tend to get used to this. I mean, it's not, in fact, puts people in really pure environments, and you can generate dangers, as hospitals have, with various kinds of infection. So it's independent of that. There's this feeling of yuck, right? And conversely, sanctity. Certain spaces we think of as holy spaces. Other spaces we think of as not holy at all. So yeah, here's an example from my own past. I'm with these people going to visit some aquarium somewhere. And near this aquarium, there really is no place to have lunch, and we'll be getting there around lunchtime. So they pack a lunch. We get down there, but there's a parking lot, you can't really, anyway, like where are we gonna eat? Well, there's a cemetery across the street, so they say, let's just go eat in the cemetery. And have a picnic lunch in the cemetery. Now, and they were totally cool with this. I couldn't do it. It's like, no, this is a sacred space somehow. I can't just go and spread and say, hey, I'll have the ham, you want the egg salad? It's like, no, I can't do it. So I couldn't do it. I stood outside and ate my sandwich while they went in and did this. Now, am I weird or crazy? Well, most people would say yes, but on other grounds. But in this case, Hike would say, well, look, yeah, it's not that I think there's any harm here, right? There was nobody around in the cemetery. And the dead people aren't going to know that I'm eating a ham sandwich, and so on. It's not unfair to anyone, but still, it seemed to me grossly inappropriate. Okay? And it connects to this sort of thing. So what are some other examples of things that are along that special dimension? Yeah.
Dignity or honor?
Dignity or honor. Okay, good. In fact, last time when we were talking about why don't you deface a dead body or something like that, it's connected to that sense of, look, it's somehow offensive to human dignity, right? It's somehow the height of dishonoring someone to display their body and let it just deteriorate and so on. And that's connected to this idea. It's you might think, well, to offend someone's dignity, isn't that a harm? Well, in a way, except, look, if we're talking about somebody who's already dead. Now, Aristotle would be concerned to say, look, you can harm the dead. If I tarnish somebody's reputation after they die, I publish something alleging all sorts of monstrous allegations against them once they're dead, and let's say I succeed in destroying their reputation, whether what I say is true or not, then you could say, yeah, I've harmed somebody even though they're dead. There's a sense in which it's worse for them, right? And maybe this is like that, but really, it feels different. Yeah?
I mean, that sanctity of marriage was always a big argument against, like, allowing gay marriage.
Okay, yes. So people have all sorts of attitudes about sexual behavior of various kinds based on this kind of thing. Often people say, but who is it hurting? Well, for the people who are upset about it, that's not the relevant dimension. The relevant dimension is something like this, okay? And we tend to react with disgust to things we view as impure. we tend to, with things that offend sanctity, we somehow feel like it's undignified, it's sacrilegious somehow. And there are certain sexual practices you might feel that way about. Actually, this isn't exactly a sexual practice, but one of the things Haidt uses as a test for people's attitudes about this is, how much would we have to pay you to have plastic surgery to attach a small tail to the end of your spine? That's it. I mean, it's not, I don't know, unless you have a thing about tails, it's not really sexual, but at least it's like, yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine being, it's like, wait, what? You want to do what to me? And it's this, it's not so much, I mean, yeah, I think that would kind of harm me, but forget that. Imagine that it's small and I can easily cover it up and so on. It's like, still, oh, you had an
I
example.
guess like a debt collector going to a funeral to like collect the debt.
Okay, good. A debt collector shows up at the funeral, right? Or actually, there are people who rob houses when people are at funerals. In fact, it's now a thing that some people have a business. While you're at the funeral, we'll go to the house, okay, and make sure people don't rob it, because there are thieves who rob. They find like, hey, Joe Smith died, and his memorial service is going to be Saturday at 10 a.m. They think, hey, we know where the Smith family will be. And that feels like, yeah, it's hard that they might get robbed, but it's worse than that, right? It's way worse than the average thief. Yeah.
On the topic of funerals from wedding crashers, they figured out the ideal way to hit on girls was when they're mourning. So they're like, oh yeah, dude, weddings? No, that's, funerals is where it's at.
Okay, yeah, good example. That seems really disturbing,
And
right?
of course, this was Will Ferrell's idea.
Ah, right, yes, say no more. But right, that seems really awful, right? And why does it seem awful? I mean, you might think, wait, this is exploitative behavior no matter where it goes, but it's like, hey, there are willing women in bars. Seems quite different from there are willing women at funerals. Wait, what? No. So anyway, it's something beyond any questions of justice, anything beyond questions of harm and so on. It's a different kind of thing. Okay, so there are additional dimensions. That's not the only one that's left out of that simple care harm and also fairness reciprocity. There are other things that we have to take into account. What are some other dimensions?
Is it loyalty and then
Yeah.
authority? I think I forgot the second one.
Loyalty and identification with some in-group. Okay? In fact, in general, these things he refers to as individual foundations. The things here are things he refers to as binding foundations, because they involve the role of morality as binding people into a group. In a sense, Haidt says, well, don't start from the idea that morality is about protecting people, observing their rights, and so on. It's really about how we all get along together. And if that's true, protecting us as individuals matters, but also strengthening the group matters. And so identification with a group is important. So what are some examples of things that might not be unjust, might not harm anybody, but nevertheless are disloyal and make you think there's something wrong with that? Yeah.
If someone tells you like a secret in confidence, and you go like finally.
Okay, good. Somebody tells you a secret in confidence and you blab it around. Maybe it doesn't actually harm you. Maybe nobody cares. Or maybe people are indifferent to whatever you reveal. Still, even though there's no harm, you feel like, wait, you're a crappy friend. Okay? You did something that person asked you not to do. It involved disloyalty. Yeah.
If your barber is out of town or unavailable, and you go to someone else, you don't.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, well, it's interesting. Different business relationships have different expectations, right? So, for example, if I go to a restaurant very often, and then I go to a different restaurant, it's not like people at that first restaurant say, what? You went to El Mercado instead of coming here? I mean, no, there's no such expectation. But people who do hair, or I gather from what my wife tells me, nail salons, they're like, you went to somebody else? Who did your nails? Right? For men, luckily, there aren't too many of these things. But anyway, yeah, there can be that, like, that was disloyal. And even if it's like, wow, they did a great job, right? But still, oh, it's kind of like infidelity, right? Other examples of this. Yeah.
When you bet against your football team.
Yeah, you bet against your football team, right? The big game between OU and UT is coming up, and you bet on Oklahoma. Okay? And then you're talking to people at lunch, and they're all saying, yeah, go Longhorns! And you say, well, actually, I placed a bet on Oklahoma. It's like, how could you do that? Right? Or, I don't know. Yeah, some people have a stronger sense of this than others. But it does feel like betting on your team, I mean, assuming you don't have any problem with gambling itself, that feels very different from betting against your own team. And it's partly due to this disloyalty. My own brother defected from allegiance to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and now he's a Carolina Panthers fan, just because he's lived in North Carolina for decades. I mean, gosh. But no, it's like, that's appalling. That's just appalling. I mean, wow, disloyalty. So anyway, some of us have a stronger attachment to this kind of thing than others. But other examples of this. Now, Haidt does want to make the point that all of these can be taken too far. So with all of these, we might think, look, there really is an Aristotelian mean in the background. That's true even for care and harm. I mean, we want people to care for other people, but not so much that they're constantly interfering. We want people to protect other people from harm, but not so much that they turn them into people who can't deal with danger or risk or whatever. Yeah?
One of my family members went through is, I think his dad was Lutheran and his mom was like Protestant, and so they were kind of against that, like.
Wait, Lutherans are Protestant?
Yeah. Or, he threw religious words at me, I don't follow.
Okay.
But you know what I mean, it was like.
Well, sure, okay, yes, I do actually.
Different denominations of like Christianity.
Right, my father grew up in a household where his father was Greek Orthodox and his mother was Roman Catholic. And so he had a choice on Sunday mornings of going to a service in Old Church Slavonic or one that was in Latin. And he thought, I don't understand any of this. And the nearest church he could actually go to was a Presbyterian church, so he started going to the Presbyterian church just because the services were in English. And so my family has been Presbyterian ever since. But it was like, wait, but you know, his parents weren't too thrilled about this. It's like, each one was willing to accept that, okay, maybe you're not going to be Catholic, maybe you're going to be Orthodox. Or maybe you're not going to be Orthodox, you're going to be Catholic. But you're going to be Protestant. Oh, you know, gosh. So yeah, there can be that kind of sense of disloyalty as well as a theological thing. Now, notice, all of these, as I mentioned, can go too far. So, for example, if your concern with purity gets out of hand, you might be like, sorry, I can't touch anything. And I've known people who won't shake hands, who won't touch anything, that constantly have, you know, hand sanitizer with them and squirt them. You know, there are people like that. And similarly here, I can be so loyal, so attached to an in-group, that I start to think anybody outside my in-group is not morally worthy. So, you might say, gosh, yes, here's a form of loyalty. Deutschland über alles. Okay? But then, yeah, that's not a good kind of in-group attachment. What happens to the out-group? Now, I'm a Steeler fan, and I'm a very loyal Steeler fan, but I don't hate people on the outside of my group. It's like, if you don't cheer for the Steelers, that's okay. I still think you're a moral human being, right? But on the other hand, if I start taking this too far, I can start thinking there's too big a divide. So you could view racism or other kinds of things as coming from this taken to a very bad extreme. Well, we've left out a fifth that's really important. What's the one we haven't gotten to? Yeah?
Like respect and authority stuff.
Exactly. So authority. Respect. Tradition. Etc. And the thought here is that, look, it's important. Now, you might say, look, isn't respect just a question of care and harm? But the idea here is, no, it goes beyond. I might disrespect you without harming you. And I might disrespect the past or the authority. So here are the kind of test questions he gives for this. How much money would I have to pay you to slap one of your parents? Or to cut off all contact with your family? Right? Some of you might be like, hey, I'll pay you. To engage in other behaviors you might think that are really, I don't know, dishonoring the past in some way. What would be examples of things like that? Showing disrespect for authority. Just think back to middle school. It's not hard. Yeah.
Like whenever like someone has like angst, tells you to do something, you just don't do it.
Yeah, okay, good. Somebody, it might be passive resistance, right? Your boss tells you to do something, you just, you don't do it. That's, by the way, not always an irrational strategy. We'll come to that later. Yeah.
When there's a substitute teacher?
Okay, good. There's a substitute teacher, right? And you misbehave utterly for the substitute teacher because you figure there are no consequences, so you show someone in a position of authority great disrespect. Or, gosh, what are some other examples? Yeah.
Disrespect like law enforcement or like anything like that.
Okay, good. Disrespect law enforcement. The officer comes over to your car and says, license and registration, please, and you just start cursing. Okay? Unwise, by the way. I do not recommend that. But apart from the unwisdom of it, you might think, yeah, that's a kind of disrespect for authority. That's a separate category. Now, if that's right, then the thought is, look, these all have to do with binding a group together. Here, in part, by respect for other people and the authority structures within that group. Here, by loyalty to the group itself. Here, through a sense of our group takes these things as fundamental values. And a lot of things in the Old Testament that were described as unclean, it's not so much that that in itself would be viewed as immoral, maybe, as that, look, this is part of what defines us. We do it this way. And if you don't do it this way, you're not only expressing some sense of disloyalty, you're really, part of what defines our group is that we treat certain things as sacred. Yeah.
I think part of it is also like why we have a separate charge for assaulting an officer. That's not just assault on a regular person. Like the same amount of harm might be done, but for some reason, if you hit a cop, it's a worse crime.
Okay, good. We have, yeah, exactly. There are heavier penalties for assaulting a police officer. We have special words for killing a king or queen, regicide, or for killing a political leader, assassination, right? There's something especially heinous and especially offensive, offensive in a moral sense, about those things that go beyond killing another human being. Yeah?
Where does it become justified though? Because like the English Civil War, that was a revolt. Like the American Revolution, that was a revolt. Like
Right.
French Revolution. Like to what like where does it become like, okay, you can like overthrow authority and even like behead Charles I. Like that's,
Right. Good, exactly. So like these other things, this can be taken too far. You can have so much respect for authority that you can allow the tyrant to tyrannize you, right? There's a certain point beyond which you shouldn't respect authority. There are times when the boss tells you to do something and you really shouldn't do it. Or the commanding officer says, round up these people and execute them, and you should not do it. Yeah.
I mean, doesn't that just like put a lot when like the authority starts to violate like 1 through 4 basically?
Well, good, exactly. If the authority itself starts being immoral or disloyal, causing harm, being unfair, etc., then you might think, now I'm justified in opposing that authority. So, admittedly, if there are many different foundations here, and the one that I haven't listed yet that he's not sure about is liberty. Some people just value liberty for its own sake. But in any event, the thought is, look, if there are these different sources, they can come into conflict, and it generates those problems of where we draw the line.